Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question which I will flip in here for you guys. And he's saying, hey, what did you mean the other day when you talked about 25 to 30 reps for a given muscle group, of quality reps being about what you need in a given session to get most of the muscle gains possible, pretty close to maximum gains. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, and let's talk about that. Now, because that's a good question, I probably should explain what I mean by 25 to 30 reps. Now, a lot of times we talk about weekly sets, weekly volume, things like that. And while that is definitely an important topic, most people understand that training frequency for drug-free lifters is probably going to be more important than total volume for gaining muscle mass. But if you were trying to gain most of the muscle that you could gain from a given session, and kind of mix that with training frequency, what a lot of people realize very quickly is that it becomes very difficult to maximize volume and maximize frequency at the same time. So trying to find that middle ground of about how many total reps you need to get enough metabolic fatigue to stimulate pretty solid muscle growth. Again, without going so over the top that you have to train at a really low frequency, because, I mean, let's be honest here. When you look at the data out there, look at the way the body works, if you're only able to really directly work a muscle once a week, again, unless you're on very heavy doses of drugs, you're not really maximizing muscle growth, probably not even close to maximizing it. So kind of where's the balance at? I would say it's about 25 to 30 reps. Seems to be kind of the sweet spot for most people for building a muscle, meaning the amount of total working sets that you need to get respectable muscle growth from a given training session. And obviously you could do more, but what people need to realize is that at that point you're going to see very rapidly diminished returns, meaning adding another 10 reps or 20 reps in there isn't going to give you an enormously larger amount of muscle growth. It might give you a 1% more, 2%, who knows. But you're also going to impede recovery and reduce frequency of training, which is going to hurt your gains. So it's about balancing these things. And when I say 25 to 30 reps, what do I mean? I mean 25 to 30 reps. Could you come in and do a 25 rep set to failure, a really high rep set, and gain muscle from that? Yes, you can. We've got studies out there showing that 25 and 30 rep sets taken to failure, because again, you're inducing metabolic fatigue by taking really high rep sets to failure. And people need to understand is that really high rep sets tend to be more anabolic when you go to failure, because when you fail with lower reps, it's oftentimes your nervous system giving out. All right, your nervous system is fatigued, and that's your limiter. Whereas in the really high rep sets taken to failure, when too many metabolites build up, which is again metabolic fatigue, then the muscle will stop contracting and won't be able to lift even a lighter weight anymore. There's a very pronounced anabolic response to that, meaning those metabolites that build up themselves can create an anabolic reaction in the muscle. It can cause it to grow outside of the actual tension aspect itself. So you could totally do that. And there's studies showing that those really high rep sets taken to failure put just as much muscle mass on as 10 to 12 rep sets do. And when I say put it on, I don't mean necessarily we studied it with biopsies for months, but the blood markers are similar. The direct trauma in the muscle when we measure it seems to be similar. So someone can gain muscle doing that. As someone who's strength-based, who's big on power training, heavy training, all of that stuff, I don't like that fact. I don't like that fact at all. I can call it pussy training all that I want, but it doesn't change the fact that the lab studies seem to show that it will put just as much muscle growth on you. You know what? I have to live with that. I cannot like it while admitting that it works. Point a lot of people struggle with. But we've got to be realistic about that. You can think a style of training is silly all you want and make someone a pussy or anything else, but if it works, it works. What are you going to do? But on the other end of that, you could also divide that up on the other extreme. How about 10 sets of 3? Yeah, you could do 10 sets of 3 for 30 reps. Good data out there showing that 10 sets of 3 or even 7 or 8 sets of 3. All right, 8 sets of 3 has shown actually very respectable muscle growth in studies that have been done. So you're the two opposite extremes. You're talking about getting all those reps from a single set or getting them from 10 sets. Both extremes work. It's a matter of how much time you want to spend in the gym and how heavy do you want to lift. But yeah, bunches of triples. Absolutely proven method of building muscle. Even seen guys do this by doing more than 10 sets of doubles. But yeah, 10 triples. Time proven method for putting on size. A lot of strength conditioning coaches like that for their athletes. You know what else is in that range? How about 5 by 5? Again, proven method for 50 years for bulking guys up. 5 sets of 5 on big heavy compound movements has been used all the way back to the 50s and 60s, even by bodybuilders to bulk up. How about 3 sets of 10? Same thing. One of the most time-proven traditional methods of bringing up muscles, particularly when you're dealing with accessory movements and isolation movements. Guys for many, many years tended to favor things like 3 sets of 10. Why? Because it works. It seems to work. Because you're really kind of falling in that sweet spot of doing 25 to 30 quality reps for a muscle to make it grow. Now, the reason we would limit something like that is, again, like I said, because if you do too much volume and you come in too much, you're actually going to impede your frequency. And when you think about it this way, though, in terms of weekly volume, what were the studies that Brad Schoenfeld showed? That weekly volumes up in the range of 10 to 15 total sets per week, right? 10 to 15 sets per week seem to maximize muscle growth. Well, if you're doing an exercise or a body part 3 times a week and you're anywhere in that range, about how many sets are you going to do? All right, if you took it to only the extremes, you would be outside of that range. But who trains that way? All right, you could come in and do 1 set of 25 3 times a week. You only got 3 sets. Probably not ideal, at least according to that data, but that data only kind of measured in the hypertrophy range, which is kind of interesting, because what happens when you go over to that range? What happens when you drop these extremes? Because obviously 10 by 3 is the same thing. You end up with 30 sets. Now, I used to train that way on camera all the time for powerlifting, by the way. During accumulation phases, I used to come in and do 10 sets of 3 on lifts 3 times a week. So I'd be doing like 30 sets on a lot of my big movements. But again, you're up to 30 sets, probably a bit much. But what happens when you go to the other ones? How about when you do 3 by 10 or 5 by 5 3 times a week? And that's the only exercise you do for that body part. You know, you can come in and bench press only for your chest. Right? You don't have to do more than the bench press for your chest if you don't want to. It's a choice. It's not like people aren't going to be doing overhead press and other stuff, and even chin-ups. Chin-ups are shown to help with the upper chest, to hit the upper chest more. But yeah, the main part of your chest, you could do bench press that way. If you did 5 by 5 3 times a week, that's 15 sets. We're right there in that sweet spot. How about if you do 3 by 10 where you're at 9? Well, 10 to 15 is there, so you're real close there. Hell, you throw in 1 more set of anything, you're good. Or what if you did 5 by 5 one of those days? And that's where it gets interesting. When you start seeing guys doing undulating periodization, you end up being right in the middle of that sweet spot. So what do I mean with undulating periodization? How about if they have a day where they do 3 sets of 10 on Monday, 5 sets of 5 on Wednesday, and 10 sets of 3 on Friday? You're right up there just above that sweet spot. You could even drop that Friday down to 7 sets of 3. Because we got data on that. 7 sets of 3 was found to be pretty effective. Just as effective as 3 sets of 10 when we checked in studies. Where does that put you? That's 15 sets a week. So you're still kind of in that sweet spot. And that's by doing only 1 exercise if you really wanted. Now, am I suggesting that people should only do 1 exercise for each body part? No. But you need to remember when you're talking about these total reps and these total sets, a lot of your muscles overlap, and when muscles start getting overlapped by big heavy compound movements, it becomes very, very easy to get large number of sets and reps per week in on a body part. And again, that goes back to the point of why I promote full body with mostly big heavy barbell movements, big heavy compound movements most of the time, because that allows you a lot of overlap. It allows you to come in and only do 4 or 5 or 6 exercises in a workout and hit every single muscle in your body, and probably put most of those muscles in the 25 to 30 rep range. All right? It lets you do that easily. If you step back and look at what I mean, what if you did deadlifts, squats, weighted dips, chin-ups, and the overhead press? All right, those 5 exercises. Every single muscle in your body got hit by at least 1 exercise. Some of them got hit by 3. You could come in and do relatively low volume, 3 to 5 sets. That's pretty low volume, but every single muscle is going to end up, almost every muscle in the body other than maybe biceps, and they probably still will also in there depending on rep ranges on the chin-ups, is going to end up with 25 to 30 reps. But that's not so taxing that you can't come and train again in 48 hours. So you do full body and you train that way, what happens? You end up hitting kind of that sweet spot to really almost maximize muscle growth. And because of all the overlap of the different compounds, some body parts got a lot more than that minimum. But because your total workload and workout was short enough, with a small enough workload you recover, you can come do it every 48 hours. You have a full day to recover, and because you hit all that volume, we talk about the growth window for naturals being anywhere from 28 to 48 hours. Well, when you're putting in decent amounts of volume and tonnage like that, that window gets closer to the 48-hour mark. So people training like that, the reason so many old school guys trained that way before the drugs were everywhere available is because they found that it worked really well. They didn't understand the science behind it. They didn't understand any of the biochemistry behind it, but they knew that they seemed to grow pretty fast when they kind of stayed in that sweet spot like that. So that's why you saw so many guys doing 5x5s, 3x10s, things like that back in the day, while doing full body 3 times a week, who had fantastic physiques by all standards, by most standards, who were also pretty damn strong as well. And this is before all these drugs hit. And it's interesting, you know, when you compare a lot of guys who really are drug-free to a lot of those old school guys who trained that way, and you look at the difference, a lot of those guys were bigger and stronger while only training 3 days a week. So just throwing that out there. But yeah, going back to the main point, because I got sidetracked there a little bit, 25 to 30 reps, as long as they're quality reps and exercises that effectively target that muscle to some extent. It doesn't have to be isolated. It just needs to be recruited and activated heavily. Should be sufficient to get you probably 80 to 90% of the possible muscle growth, if not more, from a single training session. And you got to remember, after that threshold, you're probably going to see tremendously diminished returns with every set that you do. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.